He had been out running errands all morning, moving from one shop to another with a list in his hand and a clear plan in his mind. The sun was bright and the city hummed with its usual noise: honking cars, chatter from street vendors, and the occasional distant siren. He returned to his car parked along the busy street, taking a deep breath, ready to head home. Parking in that area was always tricky, but he had made sure his car was in a legal spot. Still, he could feel the tension in the air, like something was about to happen. As he approached his car, he noticed a police officer walking toward him. At first, he thought maybe it was just a routine check. The officer's steps were deliberate, and his eyes were fixed on the man with a sharp, evaluating look. The man straightened his posture, keeping calm. He had dealt with people in authority before, and knew that losing control or reacting angrily could make things worse. The officer stopped in front of him and spoke in a firm tone, questioning whether he knew he was parked incorrectly. The man responded politely, explaining that he had checked the signs and that he was within the rules. He tried to keep his voice steady and respectful, hoping reason would guide the interaction. However, the officer's expression didn't change. There was an edge in his tone that suggested he wasn't interested in listening. Suddenly, another officer appeared, joining the first. Together, they started looking at his car, speaking to each other in a low voice but casting occasional glances at him. The man could feel the eyes of people on the street, some watching curiously, others filming with their phones. The tension around him grew, each word from the officers adding to a sense of discomfort. He remained calm, taking slow breaths and reminding himself not to act impulsively. His mind was racing, thinking about the potential outcomes but keeping his focus on the present. One of the officers leaned closer, asking for his license and registration. He handed over his documents without hesitation. He kept his hands visible, a subtle signal that he wasn't a threat. The officer examined them, flipping through the pages while occasionally giving him a suspicious look. It was clear that this was more than just a simple parking check. He could feel the subtle judgment in their words, the underlying assumptions that were unspoken but present. The street around them continued to move, people walking past, some giving brief, concerned looks. A few stepped closer, sensing the tension. He noticed the way the officers moved, slightly aggressive, ready to escalate if they felt challenged. He knew he had to stay calm, to prevent the situation from spiraling out of control. He recalled his training in handling tense moments, reminding himself that patience and composure were his strongest tools. The first officer began pointing out minor details, suggesting he was somehow violating rules, even though everything was clearly within regulations. The man explained again in a calm and steady voice, trying to reason with them. He felt a mix of frustration and caution, knowing that showing anger or fear could make things worse. The officers didn't seem satisfied, and the conversation started drawing attention. People were slowing down, some stopping to watch, and a few were recording on their phones. The man could sense the subtle shift in their behavior. Their tone became sharper, more commanding. He was asked to step out of the car. He complied, keeping his hands in view, showing no signs of resistance. The officers circled him slightly, speaking in ways that were meant to intimidate, making comments that carried a tone of accusation. Passers-by murmured among themselves, a mix of concern and curiosity filling the air. Despite the rising tension, he maintained a calm exterior. He stood tall, speaking politely when necessary and listening carefully. He could feel the adrenaline, but he controlled it, keeping his focus on preventing the situation from escalating. His mind was alert, aware of every movement around him, yet he made sure not to overreact. He thought about the importance of composure, realizing that in moments like these, calmness could be more powerful than force. The officers continued questioning him, repeating accusations that seemed baseless. He responded clearly, each word measured, refusing to let anger dictate his actions. The crowd had grown slightly drawn by the confrontation, with people watching silently, some whispering among themselves. A few tried to intervene verbally, suggesting that the man wasn't doing anything wrong. The officers paid little attention, their focus on asserting control, but the presence of witnesses added a layer of accountability. Time seemed to stretch as the conversation continued. The man noticed the subtle cues, the slight shifts in posture, the tightening of fists, the tone of voice, indicating that the situation could escalate quickly if not handled carefully. He reminded himself of his discipline, the countless hours he had spent training his mind and body to remain controlled in stressful moments. This was not a fight he wanted, but he was prepared to defend himself if necessary. He continued to explain his position, providing clear and logical answers. Each response was calm, respectful, and assertive. He made sure to communicate that he had no intention of causing trouble, emphasizing his compliance and respect for the law. Yet the officer's suspicion seemed unwavering, and the tension remained high. The crowd around them grew slightly, a mix of bystanders and people concerned for his safety, but no one stepped too close to intervene physically. The man felt the weight of the moment. He was aware that any sudden movement, any perceived act of defiance could provoke a reaction. He stayed rooted, breathing steadily, maintaining eye contact without challenging, listening carefully to every word. The situation was tense, but he refused to let panic take over. He understood the power of patience and clarity, knowing that staying composed was his best defense. Minutes passed, each one feeling longer than the last. The officers continued their questioning, occasionally making gestures that suggested impatience or frustration. The man remained unshaken, speaking calmly, demonstrating through his demeanor that he posed no threat. The onlookers watched, some nodding subtly, others shaking their heads at the apparent injustice. The city moved around them, but the small space where they stood felt isolated, suspended in tension. He thought about the unfairness of the situation, the subtle biases, the assumptions being made about him, yet he didn't allow anger to take over. Instead, he focused on what he could control, his words, his movements, and his reactions. He was aware that the eyes of witnesses and cameras were on him, and he made a conscious choice to act with integrity and calmness, showing restraint even under pressure. The conversation with the officers continued, each exchange carefully measured. The man used his voice and posture to communicate calm authority, refusing to be provoked. He observed their movements, anticipating potential escalation, ready to respond if necessary. He reminded himself that his goal was not to win a confrontation, but to navigate it safely, protecting himself while upholding dignity. As the sun shifted in the sky, the tension remained. Passers-by whispered, some expressing sympathy, others curiosity. The man's thoughts were focused, sharp yet calm. He understood the delicate balance between compliance and self-respect, recognizing that how he handled this moment could define the outcome. Every breath, every movement, every word was deliberate, grounded in experience and preparation. The officers paused for a moment, exchanging glances as if reassessing their approach. The man took the opportunity to remain steady, showing that he was aware but not reactive. He continued to maintain composure, demonstrating that he could remain unshaken even under scrutiny. The presence of witnesses added weight to the interaction, a reminder that fairness and accountability mattered. In that moment, he realized the power of calmness, patience, and awareness. He had not raised his voice, had not made sudden movements, and had remained respectful despite provocation. He understood that strength was not just physical, but also mental and emotional. The situation was far from resolved, but he had already asserted his dignity and presence through composure. The first part of the confrontation was nearing its peak, the tension high but contained. The man remained alert, aware of every detail, prepared for whatever came next. He understood that the next moments could define the course of the incident. Yet he stayed grounded, demonstrating the quiet strength that comes from discipline, awareness, and the refusal to succumb to fear. The crowd, the officers, and the man himself were suspended in a moment that balanced on the edge of potential conflict, waiting to see who would act next and how the situation would unfold. The tension hung in the air like a heavy fog. The man stood calmly as the officers circled him, their expressions a mixture of suspicion and frustration. People on the street had begun to notice the confrontation, slowing down to watch. Some took out their phones, recording the scene, while others whispered to each other, unsure of what might happen next. The man felt the weight of the moment, aware that any wrong move could turn a tense situation into something dangerous. One of the officers stepped closer, his voice sharp and demanding. He insisted the man move away from his car and continue answering questions. The man complied, keeping his hands visible and his movements slow and deliberate. He wanted to show that he had nothing to hide and that he wasn't a threat. Even though his heart was racing and his mind alert, He focused on staying calm and collected. The officer began accusing him of violating parking rules again, this time pointing to small details that didn't make sense. The man patiently explained his side, pointing out the signage and his understanding of the regulations. He kept his tone respectful, carefully choosing his words to avoid giving them any reason to escalate. But the officers didn't seem satisfied. They repeated the accusations, speaking louder and more forcefully as if trying to overwhelm him into compliance. The crowd around them continued to grow, a mix of curious bystanders and concerned witnesses. A few people stepped a little closer trying to offer support, but the officers waved them off. The man noticed the subtle glances from the onlookers, the silent messages of concern and solidarity. He drew strength from that, reminding himself that he was not alone, and that the presence of witnesses might help keep the situation from getting worse. The officers demanded that he step away from the car and put his hands on the hood. The man complied immediately, moving carefully and maintaining a calm expression. He could feel their scrutiny, the way they watched for any sign of resistance. His mind was alert, scanning for potential threats while keeping his body relaxed enough to respond if needed. He reminded himself that staying composed was more important than reacting in anger or fear. Suddenly, one officer's tone changed, becoming more aggressive. He suggested that the man was being uncooperative, even though he had followed every instruction. The man remained silent, choosing not to argue. He understood that words could escalate tension, so he relied on his calm presence and measured responses. His eyes stayed steady, making it clear that he wasn't intimidated but also not seeking conflict. The officers began speaking among themselves in low tones, but their gestures were pointed and deliberate. They were clearly debating how to handle the situation, but it was apparent that they were frustrated by his composure. The man noticed their body language, the tightening of fists, the way they shifted their weight, and understood that he needed to stay even more vigilant. He could feel the tension building around him, thick enough to almost touch. A bystander stepped closer and asked if everything was okay. One officer barked at them to stay back, making it clear that interference would not be tolerated. The man glanced at the witness and gave a small reassuring nod, signaling that he was fine but aware of the crowd. He drew strength from the people watching, realizing that their presence was both a comfort and a reminder to maintain control. The officers then demanded that he explain why he had parked there and why he didn't immediately move when asked. The man responded calmly, repeating his earlier points and providing additional details to show that he was following the law. He spoke slowly, making sure each word was clear and deliberate. Despite the officer's aggressive questioning, he maintained a steady voice, refusing to let frustration or fear dictate his responses. The conversation stretched on, each exchange feeling longer than the last. The man could sense the officer's impatience growing, their tone edging toward hostility. He focused on controlling his breathing, keeping his body relaxed yet alert. He reminded himself that his goal was not to escalate, but to protect himself and resolve the situation as safely as possible. Every movement, every word, every glance was calculated to prevent provocation. As the crowd watched, some started to murmur about the unfair treatment they were witnessing. The man noticed their whispers and their curious glances, drawing a quiet sense of solidarity from the community around him. He realized that this confrontation was no longer just between him and the officers. It had become a public moment, and how he handled it could influence not only the immediate outcome but also the perception of fairness and justice in that space. The officer's frustration became more apparent when one of them suddenly leaned closer, demanding that the man step further away from the vehicle. The man complied, taking deliberate steps backward while keeping his posture relaxed. He maintained eye contact, signaling confidence without aggression. Every movement was intentional, designed to demonstrate compliance while retaining control of his own actions. One officer reached out, suggesting they might need to detain him if he did not cooperate fully. The man's heart raced, but he remained outwardly calm. He understood that showing fear or anger could provoke unnecessary escalation. Instead, he focused on measured responses, thinking through each step and preparing for possible outcomes. He kept his hands visible, his posture relaxed but alert, and his voice steady as he continued to answer questions. The crowd had grown larger, and whispers turned into quiet discussions. People were filming, commenting, and watching closely. The presence of witnesses added an invisible layer of accountability, a reminder that actions taken here would not go unnoticed. The man drew strength from that awareness, using it to maintain calm and resist any impulse to react impulsively. As the situation stretched on, the man noticed the subtle signs of rising aggression from one officer, quickened movements, sharper gestures, and a harder tone. He sensed that physical confrontation was becoming a possibility. He prepared himself mentally and physically, remembering the training and discipline he had developed over years. He was ready to respond if necessary, but his first priority remained de-escalation and self-control. The officers began to circle him more deliberately, one of them taking a step closer with the intention of exerting physical pressure. The man adjusted his stance slightly, keeping his weight balanced and his movements controlled. He was aware of every muscle, every subtle shift, and every potential trigger. His mind was focused, analyzing each gesture and anticipating possible outcomes, all while maintaining a calm exterior. A passerby tried to speak to the officers, asking them to reconsider their approach. The officer dismissed them sharply, reinforcing the man's realization that this moment required both patience and readiness. He remained composed, drawing strength from his own discipline and from the awareness of the crowd around him. He understood that calmness and clarity could be more powerful than any argument or physical response. Time felt suspended as the officers continued their questioning, pressing him for answers and compliance. The man remained steady, answering politely, keeping his body relaxed yet prepared. Every word was measured, every breath controlled, every movement intentional. He was aware of the growing tension in the air, the way it pressed against him, and he used his discipline to navigate it with clarity. Finally, the first officer made a sharp move toward him, attempting to assert physical control. The man reacted instinctively but carefully, moving just enough to maintain balance and distance. His training allowed him to respond without aggression, using precise movements to protect himself. The crowd gasped and a few whispered in surprise at his composure and control. The tension reached a new peak, as both officers and bystanders realized that this man was not easily intimidated. The officers paused, reassessing the situation. The man stood firm, ready to respond if necessary but not seeking confrontation. The crowd continued to watch, some holding their phones, others just staring in disbelief. He understood that this moment could define the rest of the interaction, and that maintaining control was crucial. His calm presence, combined with his readiness, created a delicate balance that kept the situation from escalating further. For now, as the confrontation continued, the man reflected on the unfairness he was facing, and the subtle biases influencing the officer's behavior. Yet he refused to let anger control him. He relied on his discipline, his awareness, and his patience to navigate each moment. The crowd's presence reinforced his resolve, providing a quiet support that he drew upon silently. The street, the officers, the witnesses, and the man himself were caught in a tense standstill, each moment building toward what could come next. The air was thick with tension as the officers stepped closer, their movements more deliberate and sharp. The man's heart was beating faster, but he remained calm on the outside. He knew that any sudden reaction could provoke aggression. He could feel the crowd around them, some frozen in place, others holding their phones ready to capture whatever happened next. He reminded himself to stay composed, to rely on the training and discipline that had prepared him for moments like this. One officer reached for his arm, attempting to forcefully guide him toward the sidewalk. The man's reflexes kicked in instinctively. He stepped back and turned his body just enough to avoid being grabbed, using controlled movements that were precise and balanced. His martial arts training had taught him to react without aggression, to protect himself while minimizing harm to others. The officer, caught off guard by the speed and precision of his movements, hesitated for a brief moment. The crowd gasped, a few whispers traveling through the people standing nearby. The man's stance was strong, calm, and deliberate. He did not lunge or strike, but his body communicated that he was capable and aware. The officers looked at each other, confusion and surprise crossing their faces. They had expected compliance, not controlled skill and readiness. The man's calmness in the face of potential violence was disarming. The officers attempted to continue their intimidation, stepping closer and speaking in harsher tones. The man shifted his weight slightly, keeping his balance while maintaining a respectful posture. He spoke quietly, suggesting that there was no need for aggression and that he was willing to cooperate fully if the situation could remain calm. His voice was steady, clear, and commanding without a hint of fear or anger. One officer made a sudden movement toward his side, attempting to grab him again. The man moved with fluid precision, stepping slightly to the side and using a controlled motion to redirect the officer's momentum. The officer stumbled slightly, surprised by the maneuver. The man maintained his composure, not striking or causing harm, but demonstrating his ability to handle physical threats if they arose. The crowd murmured in awe, some expressing concern, others admiration for his discipline and restraint. The situation was a delicate balance of tension, with the man aware that any aggressive action could escalate into a serious confrontation. He remained fully in control of his body, his movements calculated to neutralize potential threats without creating unnecessary harm. His focus was absolute, every sense alert, every muscle ready to respond. Yet he did not allow his mind to be consumed by fear. The officers' aggression began to waver as they realized they had underestimated him. The man spoke again, calmly and firmly, urging the officers to reconsider their approach. He explained that he had followed all rules and that there was no need for further confrontation. His words were deliberate, respectful, and assertive. The crowd around them remained silent, watching intently, sensing the turning point in the situation. Some onlookers whispered encouragements while others recorded every moment, aware that this encounter was unusual and tense. One officer lunged toward him with a stronger attempt to grab him, thinking physical force might be necessary. The man responded with controlled agility, using a sidestep and a subtle shift of weight to maintain distance while keeping himself stable. He demonstrated mastery over his body, able to move quickly and safely without aggression. The officer stumbled slightly again, momentarily caught off guard. The man's restraint, combined with the crowd's gaze, created a pause in the officer's actions. The man's focus never wavered. He was aware of every sound, every movement, every potential danger around him. The adrenaline coursing through his body was under control, channeled into awareness and readiness rather than panic. His calm presence contrasted sharply with the escalating tension of the officers, whose frustration was now evident. The crowd's murmurs highlighted the extraordinary nature of his composure, their awe growing as they watched him respond to threats with skill and restraint. Despite the unexpected turn, the man remained respectful and non-confrontational. He used his voice sparingly, offering clear and concise suggestions for de-escalation. He reminded the officers that the situation could remain peaceful if they adjusted their approach. His tone conveyed confidence without arrogance, control without aggression. The crowd responded silently, sensing the difference between provocation and calm authority. The officers, realizing they were facing someone with both skill and restraint, paused and took a step back. Their body language shifted subtly, showing hesitation and uncertainty. They had expected a compliant individual, not someone capable of neutralizing their physical attempts with calm precision. The man continued to stand firmly, ready to respond if necessary, yet showing no intention to escalate beyond self-defense. Passers-by murmured among themselves, some expressing admiration for his discipline, others fear for his safety. The man drew strength from the awareness of witnesses, recognizing that their presence added an element of accountability. He focused on maintaining control of his body and mind, refusing to let anger, fear, or frustration dictate his actions. Every movement, every breath, every word was calculated to prevent escalation while ensuring his own safety. The officers conferred briefly among themselves, clearly trying to reassess their approach. The man continued to maintain a calm stance, demonstrating that he was prepared and capable without being aggressive. The balance of power had shifted subtly. While the officers still had authority, their previous confidence had been challenged. The crowd sensed the tension, some whispering their amazement, others quietly hoping for a peaceful resolution. The man's training and discipline became the defining factor in the encounter. Each movement was deliberate, each response measured, allowing him to navigate a potentially dangerous situation with skill and control. He demonstrated that strength was not just physical but mental and emotional as well. His calm presence and readiness created a barrier against unnecessary aggression, signaling that he could defend himself if provoked but preferred a peaceful resolution. As the standoff continued, The man spoke again, calmly explaining his position and offering to cooperate fully under fair treatment. His voice was steady, commanding attention without provoking anger. The crowd listened intently, recognizing the power in his calm authority. The officers, still uncertain and cautious, hesitated, their aggression tempered by the realization that they were facing someone not easily intimidated. The man's ability to stay composed while under physical threat and verbal pressure drew the attention of everyone present. The street, usually a place of routine activity, had become a stage for a tense real-life drama. His calmness, skill, and measured responses created a contrast to the officer's aggression, shifting the energy of the encounter. The crowd's presence reinforced his restraint, their silent support a reminder of the accountability surrounding the interaction. Every second felt elongated as the tension balanced between escalation and resolution. The man maintained full awareness of his surroundings, every subtle movement, every potential threat. His body was ready, trained to react if necessary, yet he chose patience and composure over aggression. His calm demeanor, paired with his skill, created a unique dynamic that forced the officers to reconsider their approach. The officers' attempts to intimidate and control him were met with calculated responses. He used his body to maintain space, his voice to communicate clearly, and his presence to assert calm authority. The crowd observed in silence, some whispering, some recording, all aware that they were witnessing a rare display of discipline under pressure. The man's restraint emphasized his control and understanding of the situation, turning a potentially violent encounter into a demonstration of measured skill. Finally, the officers paused, clearly realizing they had underestimated him. The man stood firm, composed, and ready, yet not aggressive. The crowd's murmurs grew, a mix of admiration and concern. The situation had reached a turning point, where the man's calm skill and martial arts training had shifted the balance of tension. He had defended himself without escalating the situation, showing a mastery of both body and mind that left everyone watching in awe. In that moment, he understood the importance of preparation, awareness, and self-control. He had faced aggression with calm and precision, protecting himself while maintaining dignity and respect. The officers, now hesitant, seemed to realize that the confrontation could not proceed as they had initially intended. The crowd sensed the resolution that was quietly approaching, the delicate balance between authority, discipline, and human restraint hanging in the air. The man remained ready, aware that the situation could still change, but confident that his calm presence and disciplined responses had already prevented unnecessary escalation. He had navigated the unexpected turn with skill, demonstrating the power of preparation and self-control. The street remained tense but quiet, the crowd observing as the encounter slowly moved toward a resolution, aware that they had witnessed something extraordinary. After the tense encounter on the street, the man finally returned to his car, keeping his movements slow and deliberate, ensuring that he remained calm even after the rush of adrenaline. The officer stepped back, looking frustrated and uncertain while the crowd slowly dispersed, whispering and replaying in their minds what they had just witnessed. Some continued filming, knowing that these moments were unusual and significant. The man stayed aware, taking a deep breath and centering himself before driving away. But he knew that the impact of what had just happened would not end there. Within hours, videos of the incident appeared on social media. People shared the clips widely, expressing outrage at how the man had been treated and admiration for his calmness and self-control. Comments poured in, many pointing out the unfairness of the officer's actions, while others marveled at the man's ability to handle the confrontation without escalating it. He watched the posts with a mixture of concern and reflection, realizing that this incident had become a public moment that would attract attention far beyond the street where it had occurred. News outlets picked up the story quickly. Headlines highlighted both the harassment he faced and the unexpected turn when he used his martial arts skills to defend himself calmly. Interviews with witnesses painted a vivid picture of the scene, the tense exchange, the officer's aggression, and the man's disciplined response. The coverage emphasized his restraint and courage, showing that he had faced a potentially dangerous situation without reacting with violence. The story became a conversation about racial profiling, self-defense, and the responsibilities of law enforcement. The man received messages from friends, family, and strangers offering support, Some praised his discipline and level-headedness, while others expressed concern for his safety and the unfair treatment he endured. He appreciated the solidarity, but remained focused on what needed to happen next. He knew that the incident had broader implications, and he began thinking about his options for addressing the situation through legal and civic channels. The viral nature of the story meant that accountability would likely follow, but he wanted to approach it thoughtfully and deliberately. Meanwhile, the police department issued a statement acknowledging the incident and promising a review. They mentioned that the interaction would be investigated to determine if proper procedures were followed. The man understood that official responses were often cautious and limited, but the attention from social media and news coverage ensured that the event would be scrutinized closely. He felt a cautious relief knowing that the presence of witnesses and documentation would help prevent the situation from being swept under the rug. The legal aspects of the situation became a focus for the man. He consulted with a lawyer to understand his rights and the options available to him. They discussed potential complaints about misconduct, false accusations, and improper handling of the situation. The lawyer emphasized the importance of evidence, witness statements, and the clear documentation provided by the recordings from bystanders. The man felt reassured that the steps he had taken, remaining calm, following instructions, and keeping the interaction safe, would serve him well in any formal proceedings. At the same time, he began reflecting on the broader societal implications. The incident highlighted issues of racial bias, assumptions, and the potential for escalation in everyday situations. He realized that his calm, controlled response had not only protected him physically, but also demonstrated a model for handling tense encounters with authority. He wanted to share this perspective carefully, focusing on awareness, preparation, and self-discipline rather than confrontation or anger. Community members began reaching out to offer support and recognition. Some local groups invited him to speak about the experience, focusing on safety, self-defense, and the importance of maintaining composure under pressure. He considered these opportunities, recognizing that his experience could help others understand the importance of preparation, awareness, and calmness when facing unjust treatment. The attention was overwhelming at times, but he approached it with the same discipline he had applied to the street confrontation. The officers involved faced internal reviews. Supervisors and investigators examined their actions, considering whether protocols had been violated. The man's calm, documented responses became central to the evaluation, showing that his treatment may have been unnecessary and excessive. Witness statements and video evidence provided a clear record of the events, reinforcing his perspective and putting pressure on the department to address the matter seriously. The situation had shifted from a private encounter to a public and institutional conversation about accountability. As the days passed, the story continued to circulate online. People discussed the incident in forums, social media groups, and community gatherings. Many focused on the man's restraint, skill, and composure, recognizing that these qualities had prevented the encounter from turning violent. Others debated issues of racial profiling, police conduct, and the broader implications for communities facing similar situations. The man followed these discussions quietly, reflecting on how individual actions could influence perceptions and outcomes on a larger scale. He also considered the personal lessons learned from the incident. Staying calm, assessing threats carefully, and using his skills responsibly had been critical. He realized that preparation, awareness, and mental discipline were as important as physical ability. The encounter reinforced the value of remaining composed in stressful situations, of thinking ahead, and of protecting oneself while avoiding unnecessary conflict. These lessons were personal but also applicable to others facing challenging circumstances. The man noticed a change in how people interacted with him after the story went viral. Some recognized him on the street, offering respectful greetings or nods of acknowledgement. Local community leaders and organizations reached out to express support and invite dialogue about safety and awareness. He appreciated the recognition, but remained focused on practical actions and responsible communication, understanding that attention could be fleeting and that lasting impact came from careful, consistent choices. Through the media coverage and community engagement, he became a voice for measured response, awareness, and self-defense. He emphasized that martial arts and physical skill were tools for protection, not aggression. and that the most important aspect of any confrontation was maintaining control and composure. His story highlighted that courage and preparation could turn potentially dangerous encounters into moments of empowerment rather than conflict. The officers involved were held accountable in various ways. Internal investigations addressed procedural errors, and the department acknowledged the importance of reviewing and improving training. The man's documented calmness and the presence of witnesses were key factors in ensuring that the officer's actions received scrutiny. The outcome reinforced the importance of accountability, public oversight, and the consequences of assumptions and improper conduct by those in authority. The broader conversation extended beyond the immediate incident. Local groups and online communities discussed the need for awareness, preparation, and civil behavior during encounters with authority. The man's example demonstrated that discipline, patience, and clear thinking could prevent escalation and protect personal safety. His experience became a case study in maintaining dignity and control under pressure, inspiring dialogue about self-defense, racial bias, and respectful engagement with law enforcement. In the midst of all the attention, the man remained grounded. He continued his daily life running errands, working, and spending time with family and friends. Yet he carried with him the lessons and awareness from the incident. The experience had reinforced his understanding of human behavior, the potential for unfair treatment, and the power of calm, deliberate action. He reflected on the moment not as a personal victory but as an example of how discipline and composure could influence outcomes in high-pressure situations. The public response continued to reinforce the importance of accountability and awareness. People discussed the incident, shared experiences, and highlighted the role of bystanders in documenting events. The man's calm, skillful response became a point of reference, demonstrating that individual preparedness could have a significant impact on the outcome of tense encounters. Community discussions emphasized the importance of both personal responsibility and institutional accountability. Through media coverage, social engagement, and personal reflection, the man realized that the encounter had lasting implications. It was not just about a single street confrontation. It was a lesson in awareness, preparation, and discipline that could resonate with many people. His calm, measured response had turned a potentially dangerous situation into a story of resilience and empowerment. The incident highlighted the intersection of personal skill, societal bias, and the power of observation, leaving an enduring impression on the community and those who witnessed it. By the end of the week, the situation had settled into a form of public awareness. The man continued to receive support, advice, and recognition, and he used the attention responsibly to highlight lessons about calmness, preparation, and respectful engagement. He understood that the true impact of the incident lay in what could be learned and shared with others, ensuring that moments of injustice could become opportunities for growth, awareness, and community dialogue. After the public attention began to settle, the man reflected deeply on the events that had unfolded. The adrenaline from the street encounter had faded, leaving a mixture of relief, pride, and lingering tension. He realized how quickly ordinary moments could turn into dangerous situations, and how essential it was to stay prepared mentally and physically. The lessons from that day were not just about his martial arts skills, but also about calmness, awareness, and the importance of measured responses. He started talking with friends and family about the experience. Their reactions varied. Some expressed concern and fear for his safety, while others admired his discipline and composure. They discussed what had happened, analyzing each moment, and the man shared how he had relied on his training to navigate the situation without escalating it. These conversations helped him process the events, giving him perspective and reinforcing the value of staying composed under pressure. As he reflected, he also thought about the broader societal context. He recognized that his experience was part of a larger pattern, where assumptions and biases could lead to unjust treatment. He realized that his response, while personal, had wider implications. By remaining calm and disciplined, he had turned a potentially violent encounter into a demonstration of resilience and control.